The old piano had been sitting there for years, forgotten by most people. It stood near the corner of a busy open hall where street performers sometimes came to show their talent. Its wooden surface was dull and scratched, and a few keys were chipped at the edges. Some people said it had once belonged to a famous teacher long ago. Others said it was just left behind when the building was renovated. No one really knew the truth anymore. What everyone did know was that it had not been played properly in a very long time, every day. Crowds passed by it without even looking. People were always in a hurry, talking loudly, checking their phones, rushing to work or home. Laughter, footsteps, and traffic sounds filled the air. The piano had become part of the background, like a piece of old furniture that no one cared to move. On that day, the hall was louder than usual. A few young performers had already finished their acts. Some sang songs, some danced, and people had gathered to watch. The mood was light and playful. Small groups stood chatting. Vendors nearby sold tea and snacks. The air smelled of dust, warm food, and summer heat. That was when a quiet figure appeared near the entrance. He looked different from most people there. His clothes were worn and faded. His shoes were dusty, and his hair was slightly messy, as if he had walked a long distance. He did not look confident or proud. His shoulders were slightly bent forward, and his eyes stayed lowered for a moment as he stepped inside. No one noticed him at first. He walked slowly, as if unsure if he truly belonged there. Then his eyes lifted, and he saw the old piano. Something changed in his expression at that exact moment. His tired face softened. His steps slowed even more. He stared at the instrument as if it were an old friend he had not seen in many years. For a few seconds, he simply stood there in silence. Then, without speaking to anyone, he took a few careful steps toward the piano. People nearby began to notice him now. Some looked at his clothes, then at the piano, and quietly smirked. A few whispered to each other. "He looks lost," one person muttered. "Is he really going near the piano?" Another said with a chuckle. The man stopped just a short distance from it. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the keys. He lifted one hand but pulled it back again. As if afraid to touch it, he took a deep breath. Then he turned toward a man who seemed to be managing the place. The manager was standing near a table, talking to someone. The quiet stranger walked toward him and spoke in a soft voice. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Can I try this old piano?" The manager looked at him from head to toe. His eyes paused at the dusty shoes, the worn shirt, the tired face. For a moment he didn't answer. He was confused. No one ever asked about that piano anymore. Before the manager could reply, a few people nearby overheard the question. Short laugh broke out, then another dot, then a few more. "Did he say he wants to play that?" Someone said loudly, "Does he even know how to play?" Another added with a grin. The laughter grew stronger. Some people actually turned around to watch what would happen next. A few raised their phones out of habit, ready to record what they believed would be something silly. The manager hesitated. He felt uncomfortable with the sudden attention. He leaned closer to the stranger and said quietly, "That piano is old. Most of the keys don't even sound right." "That's okay," the stranger answered. "I just want to try." His voice didn't shake. It wasn't proud or demanding either. It was calm and honest. The manager sighed and shrugged. "If you really want to, you can. Just don't damage it." More laughter followed. Some people clapped mockingly. Others called out jokes. "Show us what you've got. Careful, don't break the keys. Maybe it only plays sad songs now." The stranger did not respond to any of it. He simply nodded to the manager and walked back toward the piano. With every step he took, the whispers followed him. "He doesn't belong here. Why would someone like him want to play? This is going to be embarrassing." He reached the piano and stood there again. For a moment, the noise around him felt distant, like it was coming from far away. He placed one hand on the wooden surface and gently brushed away some dust with his sleeve. The dust floated into the air in small clouds. He pulled out the bench slowly. It made a quiet creaking sound that some people found funny. A few more chuckles rippled through the crowd. Then he sat down. He adjusted his position carefully, as if the piano mattered more to him than his own comfort. He rested his hands on his knees for a moment and closed his eyes. In his chest. His heart was beating fast. This place was not where he had imagined playing again. The surroundings were loud. The crowd was not kind. The piano was old and tired. But still, it was a piano. And for him, that was enough. When his eyes opened, they weren't afraid anymore. He lifted his hands toward the keys. His fingers hovered in the air, unsure for a second. The crowd leaned in slightly, waiting for the first sound. His finger pressed a key. The sound was weak and dull. Someone laughed loudly. "Oh no," someone said. Shaking their head, he tried another note. It was slightly off. More laughter followed. For a brief moment, doubt flashed across his face. The noise from the crowd pressed against his ears. He could feel their eyes on him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. As hands dropped to his lap, a few people clapped sarcastically, thinking it was already over, but then something unexpected happened. He did not leave. Instead, he closed his eyes again and slowly took a deep breath. This time, it was deeper than before. He straightened his back. The noise from the crowd softened in his mind. The hall, the people, the laughter, all of it faded for him. Only the piano remained. He placed both hands on the keys once more. In that quiet moment, no one noticed how his fingers had stopped trembling. No one noticed the change in his posture. No one noticed how his breathing had become steady and calm. The crowd was still laughing, still whispering. They had already decided what kind of person he was. To them, he was someone out of place. Someone who would become a short joke before they moved on with their day. What they didn't know was that this old piano was not strange to him. What they didn't know was that he had once spent long nights practicing in silence, teaching himself when he had nothing else. What they didn't know was that his life had taken many turns, some painful, some unfair, that had pulled him far away from music. And what they didn't know was that this moment right now meant more to him than they could imagine. His fingers moved again. Slowly. Carefully. The next note was clearer. Then another. The laughter did not stop immediately. A few more jokes were still thrown around. Some people were still smiling in amusement. But a few, just a few, began to notice something different. The sound was no longer random. It was becoming steady. The stranger's head lowered slightly as his focus deepened. His shoulders relaxed. His hands began to move with a quiet confidence, as if they remembered something that his mind had almost forgotten. The air in the hall felt different. Now the mocking voices grew a little less loud. Some phones that were raised for jokes slowly steadied. Something was beginning, and no one yet understood what they were about to witness. The old piano, which had sat silent for years, had finally been awakened. Not by laughter. Not by pride. But by a simple request spoken in a quiet voice. "Can I try this old piano?" The crowd continued to watch as he sat at the old piano, his hands hovering just above the keys. Some people were still laughing, expecting the next note to be as clumsy as the first ones. A few whispered to each other, saying it was already a waste of time. Others were ready with their phones to capture the funny moment. At first, his fingers pressed down gently, and the sound that came out was uneven and shaky. Some notes were too high, some too low, and a few didn't make much sound at all. The laughter grew louder. People pointed, nudged each other, and some even called out jokes. "Maybe it only plays sad songs now," one shouted. "Better call a repairman," said another. For a moment he paused. His eyes closed again, and he took a deep breath. The mocking noises pressed on him, but he didn't back away. Instead, he seemed to listen to the piano as if it were speaking to him. His fingers hovered again, and slowly he began to press the keys in a careful order, feeling each note. The first few notes were simple, almost like small steps in the dark. But there was something in them that made a few people stop laughing. One young man, leaning against a wall, frowned and whispered, "Wait. Is he actually doing something?" The laughter softened slightly, replaced by curiosity. The stranger's hands moved slowly now, more confidently, as if remembering a long-lost song. The old piano, tired and neglected, began to respond. The faint notes grew stronger and a soft rhythm began to form. Some of the chipped keys even seemed to sing under his touch, the crowd noticed. The whispers grew louder, but this time they weren't all jokes. "I think he can actually play," one woman murmured, nudging her friend. "No way," the friend replied. "He's just lucky." But they were both staring at him now, unable to look away. He didn't rush. Every movement was careful, thoughtful. Each note, even when slightly off, carried emotion. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and his face reflected concentration and a quiet determination. He was not performing for the crowd. He was speaking to the piano, telling it a story that only he understood. People who had come expecting a joke began to feel something different. The loud chatter and casual noise around them started to fade in their minds. The old piano was no longer just a piece of wood with keys. It had become a voice, and that voice was speaking through him. A child in the crowd stepped closer, tugging at a parent's hand. "Mom, listen to him," the child said softly. The parent leaned down and was surprised at how clear and delicate the sound was. Even the vendors selling tea and snacks paused for a moment, listening. The bustling hall felt smaller, quieter, as if time itself had slowed down just for that piano. For a few moments, the laughter disappeared entirely. The stranger's fingers moved with increasing confidence, but still gently, never harshly striking the keys. He was no longer thinking about the crowd. The music was coming from deep inside him, from memories, from years of practice, from hope he had not given up. It was honest, pure, and filled with feeling. Some people in the back started whispering excitedly, nudging friends to pay attention. "He's really good," one said. "I didn't expect this," another admitted. The crowd, which had once mocked him, now watched in silence, captivated. Their phones stayed in their hands, but for once, they weren't recording jokes, they were recording wonder. The stranger's eyes remained partly closed, his focus absolute. The rhythm of the piano changed subtly, introducing soft pauses and gentle rises in pitch. The music was no longer random. It had structure, feeling, and depth. Some of the audience could feel it vibrating in their chests. A warmth spreading that made them realize this was not just skill, it was heart. A man who had been joking loudly just minutes before now stood still, arms crossed, mouth slightly open. Even he couldn't deny what he was hearing. A woman near the front, holding a small bag of snacks, felt a lump in her throat. She had come here to pass time, expecting nothing, but now she couldn't move or speak. The piano had taken hold of her emotions without her realizing it. The stranger's performance became more confident, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because the piano responded to him. Each key he pressed seemed alive. The chipped keys, the faded wood, even the small crack in the side of the piano, it all mattered now. They were not flaws. They were part of the story he was telling through music. People shifted closer, trying to get a better view. The hall, which had been noisy and crowded, now felt like a quiet room with everyone listening to a single conversation. The mocking faces had turned into expressions of awe and curiosity. A few people even covered their mouths, not believing their own ears. The stranger's music was soft, emotional, and yet incredibly powerful. It carried a message of patience, resilience, and hidden talent. Some in the crowd realized how quickly they had judged him. The clothes, the messy hair, the tired look, they had assumed he was unskilled, unworthy, or out of place. Now, every thought of judgment was melting away, replaced by admiration and respect. The stranger was no longer a person to laugh at. He was someone to watch, to listen to learn from. The stranger began to play faster, but the music was never rushed. Each note had meaning, each pause was intentional. The rhythm became lively and captivating. People unconsciously leaned forward. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Even the child who had been tugging at a parent's hand now stood still, mesmerized. For the first time, a few in the audience stopped thinking about recording videos. They wanted to feel it, to experience it, not through a screen but in the real moment. The stranger's presence was calming, his concentration magnetic. His music had a way of reaching people in ways words never could. The crowd, who had mocked him moments ago, was now silent in anticipation, hanging on every note, The stranger paused briefly, his hands floating above the keys as if deciding what to say next. No one moved. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was filled with expectation. Then he started again. The music was soft at first, gentle, almost like a whisper, then it grew gradually, like waves building on the shore. Some people felt a shiver run down their spine. Others felt tears threatening to fall. The emotions were so raw and real that the piano became more than an instrument. It became a bridge between the performer and the audience. The more he played, the more the crowd changed. People who had been talking, laughing, or even glancing at their phones were now completely focused. Some held their hands over their hearts, feeling a connection they hadn't expected. Some faces reflected nostalgia, some surprise, and some pure awe. The stranger didn't know them, but the music spoke to all of them, as if it knew their thoughts and emotions. A few skeptical onlookers whispered among themselves, "He can't be real. How is this possible? I thought it was going to be funny. I can't stop listening." Their disbelief was slowly turning into admiration. They began to notice the way his fingers danced across the keys, the way his body moved in rhythm, the way his expression reflected every sound. It wasn't just music. It was a story unfolding in front of them, and that was when the laughter truly ended. The last echoes of ridicule faded completely. No one dared mock him anymore. They realized the music was beyond what they expected, beyond their assumptions, beyond what they thought an old, dusty piano could produce. The stranger was not performing for them. He was sharing something that had been with him for years, a gift, a passion, a piece of his soul. Every note he played now was more confident, more expressive. His fingers moved quickly across the keys, but with precision. Every sound was intentional, every pause meaningful. Some in the crowd felt goosebumps. Some whispered quietly to each other. Some just stared in silence, unable to find words for what they were experiencing. The stranger had transformed the old piano from an ignored relic into a living, breathing instrument that told a story words could never capture. No one laughed anymore. The people who had mocked him were now silent, watching closely, realizing how wrong their first judgments had been. Even the vendors, the children, the people walking past, they all stopped, caught in the moment. The hall, which had been filled with ordinary noise, was now alive with something extraordinary, a quiet, shared wonder the stranger played on, his hands moving naturally, effortlessly, yet with purpose. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't try to impress. He only listened to the piano, to himself, to the music that had waited patiently for this moment. The notes carried meaning beyond technique. They carried heart, experience, struggle, and hope. The crowd could feel it in every vibration, every resonance. They were no longer spectators. They were witnesses to something rare and incredible. For the first time in that hall, the old piano felt alive again. It had been silent for years, neglected and overlooked. But under the stranger's hands, it sang like never before. The people who had laughed were now leaning forward, mesmerized, learning a lesson they hadn't expected. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. Never dismiss something just because it looks old, broken, or unremarkable. Sometimes beauty hides where you least expect it, and still, the music continued, soft at times, strong at others, but always honest, always full of life. The stranger had changed the atmosphere entirely. From laughter and mockery to silence and awe, he had transformed the crowd. People were no longer judging. They were listening, feeling, and experiencing something inker. The music continued to flow from the old piano, and now the stranger's fingers moved faster, more confidently, yet with delicate control. Each note seemed to have its own life, speaking directly to anyone who was listening. The hall, once loud with laughter and chatter, had grown completely silent. People held their breath, mesmerized, unsure if they should speak or even blink. The stranger didn't notice them. He was no longer aware of the crowd, of the teasing comments, or the phones raised to record him. He was speaking through music, telling a story that only he fully understood but everyone could feel. The first few bars had been gentle, almost cautious, but now the music swelled. It rose and fell like waves on a calm sea, carrying both power and emotion. The stranger's hands flew across the keys with a rhythm that felt natural, almost magical. The notes were strong, clear, and alive. People who had doubted him just moments ago couldn't help but move a little closer, their eyes widening in disbelief. They could feel the music vibrating through the floor, through the walls, even through their hearts. A woman standing near the front of the hall wiped a tear from her cheek. She hadn't realized she had been holding back emotion, but the music had broken through her defenses. Across the hall, a man pressed both hands to his chest, feeling a sudden warmth that spread like fire through his body. The stranger's music wasn't just notes anymore. It was emotion, memory, and something deeper that no one could quite name. Some children, who had come with their parents, whispered excitedly to each other, "It sounds amazing." Their parents nodded, unable to take their eyes off him. Even the vendors paused, leaving the clatter of cups and trays behind, mesmerized by the sounds that seemed to come from another world. Every person in the hall, whether young or old, rich or poor, had been caught completely off guard. They had come expecting nothing. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The stranger's face reflected a mix of concentration and calm. His eyes were sometimes closed, sometimes looking slightly downward at the keys, but always focused. He had lost all awareness of the world around him, lost all fear of judgment, lost all doubt. He played as if he were speaking directly from his soul, each note carrying a piece of his life years of struggle. Late nights of practice, moments of loneliness, and moments of hope that had kept him going. The crowd, now silent, began to notice the details in his playing. The way his fingers hovered just above the keys before striking them gently. The small pauses he took to let each note breathe. The way he made even the broken keys sound beautiful. Everything told them that this was not a beginner, not an amateur, and not luck. This was someone who had lived and loved music in a way that could not be taught in a single lifetime. Some people held their hands to their mouths in shock. A few whispered softly, almost to themselves, "I can't believe it." Others looked at each other, eyes wide, realizing how wrong they had been to judge him. The laughter that had filled the hall earlier had completely disappeared. There was no room for it now. Only awe remained. The stranger changed the pace of his playing. He moved from fast, lively notes to slow, deep chords that echoed through the hall like a heartbeat. The contrast was breathtaking. The crowd could feel it, the rush of excitement followed by a gentle calm, like life itself condensed into a few minutes of music. People leaned in, some closing their eyes, letting the piano carry them away. They could feel the sadness, the joy, the longing, and the hope that the stranger poured into every note. A man in the back, who had been mocking him just moments before, now stood frozen, his arms crossed, his face pale. He couldn't take his eyes off the stranger's hands. How is he doing that?" he whispered, as if asking himself a question he might never find the answer to. His friend, who had laughed loudly earlier, now nodded slowly, unable to find words. The music had silenced everyone, but it had also spoken louder than words ever could. The stranger's playing became more expressive. He leaned slightly over the keys at times, then sat upright again, letting the music guide him. Every note seemed intentional, like he was telling a story, and every pause felt like a meaningful breath. The chipped keys, the worn wood, the dusty bench, all of it mattered, but none of it seemed to limit him. Instead, it added character, a history that made the music even more powerful. People in the audience started to notice the little details that made the performance extraordinary. The stranger didn't just play the piano. He became one with it. The way his hands moved so gracefully, the way he pressed just enough on each key to create a perfect sound, the subtle way he adjusted his posture with each chord, it was all perfect. Even if it wasn't perfect in a technical sense, there was honesty in every movement, an honesty in music that could touch hearts in ways no one could ignore. A young girl tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at the piano. "Mom, he's like a magician," she whispered. Her mother smiled, eyes still fixed on the stranger. "Yes," she said softly, "but it's more than magic. It's talent and heart." The words were simple, but they captured what everyone was feeling. The stranger's music was beyond entertainment. It was something deeper, something almost spiritual. As the performance continued, the stranger's hands moved faster but never carelessly. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The hall seemed to breathe with him. Some people felt chills down their spines. Some felt tears welling up in their eyes. Some felt their hearts race. The stranger had not only captured their attention, he had captured their emotions, making them part of the story he was telling. It was in this moment that the full transformation of the crowd occurred. Those who had laughed, those who had mocked, those who had whispered rude comments, they all realized how wrong they had been. They understood now that appearances could be deceiving, that talent could hide in the most unexpected places, and that judging someone too quickly could make you miss something extraordinary. Even the people who had been indifferent, passing by without caring, now stood still. They watched, they listened, they felt. The stranger was no longer just a man at an old piano. He was a bridge to something beautiful, a reminder that the world still held surprises, still held moments of true, unfiltered art. The music began to slow, but it did not lose its intensity. Instead, it became more emotional, more reflective. Every note seemed to carry a memory, a feeling, a story. Some people felt as if they could hear the stranger's life in the music, the struggles, the heartbreaks, the quiet victories, the moments of hope that had kept him going even when life had been harsh. The piano was not just an instrument anymore. It was a voice. And that voice was speaking truths that everyone in the hall could understand. The crowd, now completely silent, realized they were witnessing something rare, something they would not forget. They had come expecting ordinary entertainment, or perhaps nothing at all, and instead had been given a glimpse of greatness. The stranger, who had been mocked, underestimated, and ignored, had shown them the power of patience, practice, and perseverance. His hands finally slowed. The notes grew softer, like whispers. The last chord hung in the air, vibrating gently before fading away completely. For a moment there was total silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The energy in the hall was so intense it was almost tangible. People looked at each other, eyes wide, hearts still racing, unsure if what they had heard was real or a dream. Then, slowly, a soft clap began. One person, then another, then another. The claps grew louder and louder until the hall was filled with applause, cheers, and cries of amazement. People who had laughed and mocked moments before were now on their feet, clapping as hard as they could. Some shouted words of praise. Others simply smiled, tears in their eyes, unable to find words. The stranger sat there, breathing steadily, a small, humble smile on his face. He did not stand, did not bow, did not speak. He simply let the music linger in the hearts of everyone present. The applause was for him, for the music, and for the courage it had taken to play despite doubt, mockery, and fear. In that hall, an old piano had been transformed. An ordinary crowd had been awakened. And one quiet man had reminded everyone of something important. Talent and heart are never to be underestimated. And sometimes the most incredible performances come from the most unexpected places. The crowd, still clapping, had learned a lesson that words could never teach. They had laughed at him. They had doubted him. And yet they were now filled with awe, respect, and something even stronger, belief in the unexpected, in the extraordinary hidden in plain sight. And as the applause continued, the stranger simply sat at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes calm, knowing that he had shared something far greater than music. He had shared a story of patience, hope, and the quiet power of never giving up. The applause filled the hall, yet the stranger did not move from the piano. His hands rested lightly on the keys, his breathing calm and measured. The crowd, still clapping and cheering, had been completely transformed by what they had just witnessed. The mocking, the laughter, the doubt, all of it had vanished. In its place was awe, admiration, and curiosity. People were staring at him, trying to understand who this quiet man was and how someone so ordinary looking could create something so extraordinary. After a moment, One brave person in the front of the hall stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Where did you learn to play like that? How did you get so good?" The stranger looked up at her, his eyes calm and thoughtful. He did not smile widely, nor did he boast. Instead, he spoke quietly, as if sharing a secret rather than giving a performance. "I taught myself," he said softly. "A long time ago, when I was very young, I found a piano that no one wanted. It was broken and old, but I loved it. I spent hours and hours learning by myself. No teacher, no school, just the piano and me. I made many mistakes, but I kept going because music was the only thing that made sense to me. It was the only thing that made me happy when nothing else did." The crowd grew even quieter, hanging on his every word. Some people exchanged glances, realizing that the performance they had just witnessed was not only about skill, it was about years of struggle, dedication, and passion. It wasn't just talent. It was determination and resilience, things that no one could buy or fake. A man in the back of the hall, who had been one of the loudest critics moments ago, whispered to his friend, He didn't just play, he lived it. Every note had a story." His friend nodded, unable to speak. They had all expected entertainment, but what they had experienced was far deeper. The stranger continued, "I never had much. People laughed at me. They told me I would never succeed, that I was wasting my time, that I wasn't good enough. Sometimes I almost believed them. But every time I played, even in secret, I felt hope. I felt alive. Music was the only place where I could be myself." His voice trembled slightly, and a few people noticed a hint of emotion behind his calm words. A woman near the front wiped a tear from her cheek. She whispered softly to the person next to her, "He's been through so much. And still he never gave up." Many people nodded quietly, realizing that they had witnessed not only a musical performance, but a life story of courage and persistence. The stranger looked around the hall, his eyes meeting the eyes of people who had once laughed at him. He did not speak angrily, nor did he demand apologies. He only said, "I know some of you doubted me. Some of you laughed. That's okay. I understand. I was just hoping for a chance to play. That's all I ever wanted, a chance." His words struck the crowd like a gentle wave. They had judged him at first glance, dismissed him because of his appearance, his worn clothes, and the old piano. And yet, here he was, showing them the depth of his heart and the strength of his spirit. The lesson was clear: never underestimate someone, and never judge a book by its cover. A young boy near the back raised his hand shyly. Did you really teach yourself all of that?" he asked. The stranger smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes," he said. "Every note, every chord, every song. I learned it on my own. It took time, patience, and a lot of mistakes, but I never stopped believing that I could do it." The boy's eyes widened and he looked at his parents with awe. "I want to do that too," he whispered. The parents smiled, understanding that this simple performance had become an inspiration for everyone in the hall, young and old alike. The stranger then told a little more about his past. "There were times when I had almost nothing. Some days I didn't even have enough to eat. But the piano was always there. Whenever life was too hard, I would sit at the piano, close my eyes, and play. It made the world feel better, even if only for a few minutes. Music became my friend, my comfort, my escape." His voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. People felt it in their hearts, as if they could share his struggles and understand the pain and hope that had carried him through those years. A woman in the crowd, who had been skeptical from the start, whispered to her companion, "It's amazing. He didn't just play. He lived through every note. You can feel it." Others nodded quietly, understanding exactly what she meant. The music had been beautiful, but the story behind it made it unforgettable. The stranger paused for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then he said, "I didn't come here for fame or attention. I just wanted to play. And now, seeing all of you listening, seeing your reactions, it means more than words can ever say. It reminds me why I never gave up, even when no one believed in me." Some people in the audience felt tears running down their cheeks. Others held their hands over their hearts. The energy in the hall was electric, but it was quiet, filled with emotion rather than sound. Everyone understood that they had been given a glimpse of something rare, someone's life, their dedication, and the beauty of their spirit expressed through music. A young woman near the front whispered to a friend, "I've never felt anything like this before. It's not just the music, it's him. Everything about him, his story, his courage, it's incredible." Her friend nodded, unable to add anything. Words seemed too small for what they were feeling. The stranger looked back at the piano, lightly brushing his fingers over the keys. "This piano has been with me through everything," he said softly. "It has been broken, forgotten, ignored. Just like me at times. But together we found a way to create something beautiful. That's why I asked if I could play today. I didn't expect applause or attention. I only hoped for a chance to share what I love." A few people in the crowd, who had been recording the performance on their phones, lowered them. They realized that what mattered most could not be captured on video. It had to be experienced in person, felt in the heart. The stranger had given them more than music. He had given them inspiration, hope, and a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, one can persevere and create beauty. A man near the back, who had been quiet all this time, finally spoke. "You've changed how I think," he said. "I judged too quickly. I didn't believe in you, but now I do. Thank you for showing us." The stranger nodded humbly. "Thank you for listening," he replied softly. "That's all I ever wanted." The crowd began to applaud again, louder and longer this time, not only for the music, but for the story behind it. People shouted words of encouragement, some even calling out their admiration. The stranger's performance had turned into a shared experience, a moment that connected everyone in the hall. Even if only for a short time, children looked up at him with wide eyes, inspired to pursue their own passions no matter how impossible they seemed. Adults looked at him with renewed respect, realizing that strength, patience, and heart could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Everyone felt a quiet sense of gratitude, as if they had been given a gift that could not be bought or measured. The stranger finally stood up from the piano bench. He smiled faintly at the audience, bowed his head slightly, and stepped back. The applause continued, some people cheering, some crying, some simply smiling with awe. The energy in the hall was almost tangible, as if the music and the story had left a permanent mark on everyone who had been there. He spoke one last time, before leaving the piano. "Remember," he said softly, "never give up on what you love, even when no one believes in you. Sometimes all you need is a chance, and that chance can change everything." People nodded, some whispered, "Thank you." Others just looked at him, trying to hold on to the feeling that he had left behind. They had witnessed more than a performance. They had witnessed courage, resilience, and the power of passion. As he walked slowly toward the exit, the crowd began to disperse, still talking about what they had just seen. The hall no longer felt ordinary. The old piano, once ignored and forgotten, now seemed alive with the memory of what had happened. The stranger had left more than music behind. He had left inspiration, hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, talent and heart could shine brighter than anyone ever expected. And for the people who had doubted him, laughed at him, or ignored him, the lesson was clear. Judging someone too quickly can make you miss the most extraordinary stories, the most beautiful music, and the most inspiring human moments. The quiet stranger, who had walked in unnoticed, had changed everything that day. The crowd was still buzzing from the stranger's performance, but the impact of what they had just witnessed was far from over. People whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some had tears in their eyes, others were clapping quietly, overwhelmed by the power of the music and the story behind it. The hall that had been filled with laughter and chatter hours ago now felt alive in a completely different way, alive with hope, inspiration, and shared emotion. As the stranger slowly walked away from the piano, some people approached him cautiously, unsure if it was even polite to speak. "That was incredible," one person said softly. "I didn't believe at first, but you've completely changed my mind." Others nodded, some offering small smiles, some shaking their heads in amazement. It was as if everyone needed to express their feelings in some way, to let him know that what he had done mattered. A young boy tugged at his mother's hand, pointing toward the stranger. "Mom, I want to play the piano like him," he said, eyes wide with excitement. His mother smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You can," she whispered. "If you practice and never give up, you can be just like him." The boy looked at the stranger, who had paused to acknowledge a small bow from one of the audience members. That simple interaction, so quiet and humble, inspired more than words could ever convey. Some of the older people in the hall, who had come expecting casual entertainment, were still sitting in their seats, stunned into silence. They had judged him, assumed he would be nothing more than a curiosity or a joke, and now they were forced to reconsider everything. The stranger had not only shown them musical skill but also resilience, humility, and the quiet strength of a person who had faced countless obstacles and never given up. It was a lesson in human spirit that they would not forget. Meanwhile, the old piano, once ignored and dusty, seemed different somehow. It had been awakened, brought to life by someone who understood its potential, someone who had nurtured it with care and respect. People who had laughed at its old, chipped keys now looked at it with wonder. The instrument itself had become a symbol, a reminder that beauty can be hidden in unexpected places, waiting for someone to recognize it and give it a chance. As the stranger walked toward the exit, a small group of people followed him respectfully. Some asked questions, some wanted to know more about his story, others simply wanted to express gratitude. He answered gently, without pride or arrogance, speaking of his love for music, the hardships he had endured, and the long hours of practice that had brought him to this moment. Every word he spoke carried sincerity, and everyone listening could feel the honesty behind them. A young woman in the crowd asked him, "Will you perform again somewhere else? Will others get to hear you play?" He paused and smiled faintly. "I hope so," he said. "I never wanted attention or fame. I only wanted to share music. If people want to listen, I will play. But the most important thing is to keep going even when no one is watching or believing in you. That is when music or anything you love truly matters." The audience, moved by his words, began to discuss quietly among themselves. Some spoke about how inspiring it was to see someone follow their passion despite hardship. Others talked about the lesson they had learned about judging people too quickly. Even the children seemed more thoughtful now, understanding that determination, patience, and courage could overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. Soon, news of what had happened began to spread outside the hall. Some of the audience members shared their experience with friends, describing the quiet stranger and the magic of the old piano. Others shared videos online, not to mock or make fun, but to inspire and show the world that talent and heart can be found in the most unexpected places. The stranger had become a symbol of hope for people who had faced challenges, for people who had been doubted, and for anyone who had ever been told they could not succeed. Back in the hall, the atmosphere was electric with admiration. People continued to discuss the performance, sharing their favorite moments and the parts of the music that had touched them most deeply. Some felt that the stranger had reminded them of their own dreams, of passions they had abandoned or ignored. The energy in the hall was no longer just about music, it was about belief, hope, and the power of giving oneself fully to something you love. The stranger, meanwhile, had quietly returned to the piano. He brushed the dust off the keys gently and placed his hands on them. Some people thought he might play again, and when he did, it was softer, slower this time, almost like a lullaby. It was not a performance for applause, but a gift to those who were still listening, to those who wanted to feel the music in their hearts. Every note was deliberate, heartfelt, and full of meaning. People sat in silence, watching him play. Even those who had been skeptical or dismissive before could not tear their eyes away. The music spoke to them in ways words never could. It was not about talent alone, it was about honesty, courage, and the strength of a person who had believed in themselves when no one else did. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound fill their minds, while others held hands with friends or family, sharing a quiet moment of awe together. As the final notes faded into silence, the hall erupted once again, this time with louder and longer applause. People stood, some cheering, some crying softly, some simply smiling with admiration. The applause was not just for the music. It was for the courage it represented, for the story of a human being who had never given up despite hardship and doubt. The stranger stood, bowed slightly, and allowed the audience to continue showing their appreciation. After a while, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy remained. People talked about what they had seen and heard, replaying the story in their minds. Some shared the lesson they had learned: never judge someone by appearance, never dismiss someone because they seem ordinary, and never give up on what you love, even when the world doubts you. The stranger's performance had become more than a moment in time. It had become a memory that would inspire people long after they left the hall. The stranger, now alone, looked at the old piano one last time. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the echoes of the music that had passed through them. For him, it was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a friend, and a reminder of how far he had come. He smiled faintly, knowing that the piano, the audience, and the experience would remain in his memory forever. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, feeling a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The world around him continued as usual. Cars passed by. People walked down the streets. The sun began to set, but he carried with him something extraordinary: the knowledge that he had shared his passion, touched hearts, and reminded people of the power of perseverance and belief in oneself. Over the next days and weeks, the story of the stranger and the old piano spread further. People who had been in the hall told others, videos circulated online, and news outlets picked up the story. But more than fame or recognition, what mattered most was the message. People everywhere were inspired, encouraged to pursue their own dreams, to practice patience, and to never stop believing in their own potential. No matter how difficult life might seem, the old piano, once ignored and forgotten, became a symbol of hidden talent and second chances. People who had mocked it before now saw it differently, as an instrument capable of creating beauty beyond expectation. And the stranger, who had walked in quietly and asked for a simple chance, had transformed the lives of everyone who had witnessed him. In the hearts of those who had been there, the memory remained vivid. They remembered the music, the story, and the courage of someone who refused to give up. And they remembered the lesson: life is full of hidden potential. And sometimes all it takes is one chance, one moment, one person who believes in themselves, to create something unforgettable. The hall returned to its usual rhythm, but it would never feel the same. People who had been there carried with them a reminder of hope, resilience, and the beauty of perseverance. The stranger's story had become a part of their own, a spark of inspiration that they could carry forward. And for him, the experience reaffirmed the power of passion, the joy of sharing one's gift, and the truth that courage, heart, and belief in oneself can change the world, even in the smallest of ways. And so, the quiet stranger who had once been laughed at and underestimated left the hall not with applause or fame as his only reward, but with something far more meaningful: the knowledge that his music had touched lives, inspired hearts, and reminded the world of something too often forgotten: that the human spirit, when fueled by passion and perseverance, can create moments of extraordinary beauty that linger forever.